don't remember if they had any theories about why that was. So, but it made sense to me. I think we all have something sturdier inside of us that rears up when we're being attacked, that we simply can't call upon when someone we love is being attacked, especially if that someone is our parent, half of us, the primary other, and the person doing the attacking is the other half, the other parental other. I know of what I speak. My own father was a destructive force in my life. If you make a map of my life and traced everything back, all the moves and the decisions and transitions and events, my mother mustering the courage to divorce my father when I was 6 was probably the single best thing that ever happened to me. My father got my mother pregnant when they were both 19. They weren't very much in love, but abortion was illegal, and my mom wasn't willing to go away to a home for wayward girls and give her baby to someone else. So she married my father in a quickie wedding. Over the next 9 years, they had 3 children, my 2 siblings and me, and some very hard things happened. I have so many horrible stories about the years with my dad, who was often violent and mean, but those aren't the stories you need to hear. What you need to hear is how much, as a child, I loved him, my father, my dad, my daddy. The love I had for him was tremendous, irrefutable, bigger than my terror and sorrow. I could not keep myself from loving my dad. It was simply there. To not love him had never occurred to me, no matter how ugly it got. I hated what he did to my mom and my siblings and me. I wept and shrieked and hid and got age inappropriate headaches and peed my bed way beyond the age that's normal. But he was my father, and so when my mother finally left him, I begged her to go back. I mean, I begged her in a way I have never begged anyone for anything in all my life. I sobbed my 6-year-old girl brains out because I knew that if it was really over, if my mother really left my father, I would no longer have a dad. And you know what? I was right. After my parents divorced, I no longer had a dad. I've seen him 3 times since then. Short visits during which sad and creepy things happened, but mostly there was nothing. No dad. There was only the great fatherless alone for years of my childhood, during which I lived in a cheap apartment building occupied by other children of single mothers, most of whom also had little to do with their fathers. A couple of times a year an envelope would arrive addressed in my father's hand to me and my siblings. It would be waiting for us in the mailbox when we returned from school. Our mother at work, my brother and sister and I would rip those letters open with a gleam so entire that a surge of something runs through my body still as I type these words. A letter from our dad. A letter from our dad, from dad. But of course we should have known better. We knew better, but we couldn't bear to let ourselves know. The envelope had our names on it, but the letter inside was never for us. It was always something else, and always the same thing. A nasty and vulgar diatribe directed at our mother. How she was a whore and a welfare mooch. How he should have made her get that illegal abortion years ago. How she was a horrible mom. How he would come and get me and my siblings when she least expected it, and she'd be sorry. Then she'd pay. Then she'd never see her children again. How would she like that? The thought of my father kidnapping me terrified me more than anything. It was with me always, the prospect of being snatched. I readied myself, playing out intricate fantasies about how my siblings and I would escape, how I'd get us all back to our mother at any cost. We'd walk across the country barefoot if we had to. We'd follow rivers and hide in ditches. We'd steal apples from the trees and clothing from clotheslines. But our father never took us. He never had any intentions of doing so. I realized one day when I was 27, he never wanted me. I thought with such clarity and surprise and grief that I instantly broke into sobs. Will the father of your baby ever father his child? Oh, Mama, we don't know. That letter hasn't been ripped open yet. Anything could be inside. People change. People make dreadful mistakes and then repair them. Men who are distant when their children are babies sometimes turn into wonderful dads. Others continue to be only more of the same. Whatever happens, you will do right by your child by keeping whatever you feel about his or her father separate from the choices you make and the actions you take in regards to his or her relationship with his or her dad. Your behavior and words will deeply impact your child's life, both how he or she feels about his or her father and also how he or she feels about him or herself. My mother never spoke an ill word about my father to my siblings and me. She had every right to hate him, to turn us against him, but she didn't. It wasn't that she lied to us about him. We spoke often and honestly about the hard things we'd witnessed and suffered at his hands, but she didn't demonstratize him. She cast him as human, complicated, flawed, and capable of redemption, which means in spite of everything, she made it possible for me to love my father, this absent man who was half of me. When I was a child and asked her what had made her fall in love with my dad, she thought of things to tell me, even if she couldn't rightly remember them anymore. When I was a teenager and we argued about her refusal to condemn my father, she told me that she was grateful for him because without him, she wouldn't have had my siblings and me. When I was just barely becoming a woman and my mom knew she was going to die, she stroked my hair and told me it was okay if I wanted to reach out to my father again, that I should always be open to the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation and change, and that doing so was not a betrayal of her, but rather evidence of the woman she'd raised me to be. It isn't fair that she had to be so kind to such an unkind man. I hope she raged about him to her coolest friends as a single mother, and by that I mean truly a mother alone like you. Oh, Mama, one who does not share custody or co-parent. She had to be her best self more often than it's reasonable for any human to be. And you know what? What's so never-endingly beautiful to me? She was imperfect. She made mistakes, but she was her best self more often than it's reasonable for any human to be. And that is the gift of my life. Long after she was dead, it was her words and conduct that formed the bridge I teetered across to heal the wounds my father had made. That's the gift you have to give your child, regardless of how your baby's father decides to conduct himself, regardless if he ever steps up and becomes the father to your son or daughter he should be. It's what most of us have to give a few times over the course of our lives, to love with a mindful, clear sense of purpose, even when it feels outrageous to do so, even when you'd rather put your steel-toed boots on and scream. Give it. You won't regret it. It will come out in the reckoning. Yours, Sugar. I really like that. That's the passage that's part of the passage that I heard when I was listening to that I first heard of Dear Sugar. I was listening to the Theory of Enchantment workshop on anti-racism, and I was so moved by her words. My father was an abusive drug addict, and we lived with him. My mother was a strong woman, but fairly codependent, and I wished for her to leave so many times as a young girl. I cannot totally relate to Cheryl Strayed's experience as far as like wanting to be with her father. I didn't want to be with my father. I wanted my mother to leave, and the one time that she did leave and took us to our aunt's, and then my dad begged my aunt to force my mom to leave, and my mom had to leave, I was really upset, and I didn't want to go back. It was a very scary place to be around my father. But I have often thought back about those days, and I've been grateful to have a father in my life and to have had him around, even through the hard times. I kind of look at it like Maya Angelou says, I wouldn't take anything from my journey now, and I wouldn't change anything now, even through those hard times, unfortunately, that I had to suffer, and my siblings and my mother had to suffer with our father, because I wouldn't have got to know him in the way that I did know him, and I do know him. So there is somewhat part of me that's grateful. And my mom was an honest woman. She didn't really make any bones about the things that my dad did that were wrong. She never hid the fact that he was on drugs. She never hid the fact that what he did being abusive was wrong, although she was codependent and she stayed with him. And he told us not to tell the police that he was on drugs or tell anybody, and we did have secrets in that house. I appreciate the fact that she was upfront and honest with us, and she didn't try to say he was perfect. She just let us come to terms with who he was. And I think that I know that I did the same thing with my girls when my ex and I separated. I let them know the truth, and I let them make their own decisions regarding their father. I have to say that maybe there's some selfishness and bitterness in that, because I don't know for sure that there is, but when I read that her mom encouraged her to have a relationship with her father, I don't know that I would do that with my girls, because I don't really think that's my place. I think that I'd rather just allow them to come to me and talk to me and tell me how they feel about that, about their father, and if they ever did decide to do that, that would be on them. It wouldn't be something I would push on to them. He's done some horrible things to them, and if and when they decide to forgive him, that's on them. And if they ever decide to have a relationship with them, I feel like that's on them. So I always try to separate myself from other people's lives in that way, because I don't think it's healthy to try to control them in any way, shape, and form. But I do like that her mom opened the door up for her by saying, you don't have to feel like you have to protect me. You don't have to feel like you have to defend me. If you want to have a relationship with your father, please go ahead. I think with me and my girls, that's pretty unspoken, but maybe it's not, and maybe that's something that I need to consider saying. Those are my thoughts on the passages today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Michelle's Mashup. I'm really enjoying getting down into the weeds with Cheryl Strayed on these tiny, beautiful things. If I have said anything to upset or offend anyone, I apologize. I realize on my last episode, I said something about miscarriage or about babies being with us and God having a purpose and a plan. And I know that idea can be painful to some. And I apologize if I offended anyone with my words regarding that, because I never, ever want to offend anyone. And I think it's the worst thing we can do is to presume we know how anyone's feeling when they've had a miscarriage or when they've had a stillbirth or when their child has issues. We shouldn't make assumptions, and we should let people talk to us and come to us and just let them know that we love them and listen and be there. But don't make assumptions and don't say things like it's in God's plan. I would never say that. And I didn't mean to offend when I said that, I think that God does have a plan, because I do believe that in my heart of hearts. But I don't mean to suggest that God wants anyone to suffer or wishes that on people. That is something that happens in the world, and that is a consequence of being human. I don't think that it has anything to do with God and God's will. Thank you so much for listening today. I look forward to talking to you and going through the next letter from Dear Sugar. Have a good